The frost came early that year, and it came the colour of iron. It lay on the cobbles of Colworth before light, and did not lift until noon, and the smell of the town in that hour was coal smoke and wet wool and the flat mineral smell of cold stone that has not seen sun. It was the kind of morning that got into a person's knuckles and stayed there. Eliza Marsh was not the sort of woman anyone in Colworth troubled to look at twice. She was 24, thin through the wrist, plain in the face in the particular way that made strangers forget her before she had left the room. She wore her mother's darned gloves with the fingers gone soft and thin as paper, and she carried, always, in the pocket of her cloak, her father's old pen. It had a silver nib worn crooked from years of use, and it left a stain on the third finger of her right hand that no amount of scrubbing had ever quite lifted. Her father had been a parish clerk, dead 6 winters now, of a fever that took him in 4 days, and the only things he had left her were the pen, a good, clear hand, and a head for figures that added a column faster than most men could read at once. She earned her bread copying letters and legal papers 2 mornings a week for Mr. Duffield, the solicitor, and the rest of the week with a needle, mending linen for those who could pay, and, more often than she liked to admit, for those who could not. She lived above the chandler's shop, in 2 rooms that smelled of tallow, and she told herself most days that she wanted nothing more than what she had. The widow Coombs account was going to come due before the week was out, and somebody was going to pay for it. Eliza did not know that yet, not fully, not on the morning the frost came down like a judgment. She knew only that Mr. Duffield had asked her to come in early, and that his clerk had looked at her with a face gone careful and closed, the way a face goes when it is holding something it has been told not to say. The solicitor's office sat on the high street between the drapers and the bank, 3 rooms deep, and the front room always smelled of dust and dried ink and, faintly, of the tallow candles Mr. Duffield was too frugal to replace with wax. Eliza came in, stamping the frost from her boots, and found the front room already occupied. Widow Coombs sat in the one good chair, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that the knuckles had gone white, and she did not look up when the door opened. She was an old woman, older than her years, with a face that kindness had once lived in, and grief had since worn thin. Her husband, dead these 10 years, had kept a small shop selling rope and tackle down by the river, and when he died the shop had gone to debt the way water finds a crack in a wall, slow and then all at once. Her son had gone to sea and not come back. What she had left was a grandson, a boy of 8 named Tom, who lay at that hour in a back room 3 streets away, burning with a lung fever that had settled in after Christmas and would not lift. There was a third person in the room. He sat in the corner by the cold hearth, in a plain brown coat with no ornament to it, and he was reading a paper he did not seem to be reading. He did not rise when Eliza entered. He did not speak. He had the kind of stillness that made a room forget he was in it, which was, though she did not know it yet, a very great irony, because she had spent her whole life being the one a room forgot. Mr. Duffield came out from his inner office with a paper in his hand and his spectacles pushed up onto his forehead, which was a sign, Eliza had learned, that he was unhappy with what the paper said. "Mrs. Coombe," he said, "I am sorry. There is no more time in it. The note comes due Friday next, £240, with the interest. If it is not paid, or the debt taken up by a surety the court can accept, the estate's agent has instruction to proceed." The widow did not weep. She had, Eliza thought, the look of a woman who had used up her weeping years ago, and had none left to spend. "I have nothing," she said. "I have sold the good chairs. I have sold my husband's watch. I have Tom, and Tom is sick, and if they take me up there is no one." "The estate is not unkind, mister," Duffield said, in the voice of a man who did not entirely believe what he was saying. "But it is owed what it is owed." The man in the brown coat did not lift his eyes from the paper. But Eliza, glancing at him without meaning to, saw that his jaw had gone tight, the way a man's jaw goes tight when he is keeping himself from speaking. She had come in only to copy a lease. She had 2 shillings in her reticule, and a debt of her own to the chandler for the month's rent. She had no business at all in what was being decided in that room. And yet she heard herself say, before she had decided to say anything, what surety would the court accept? "Missa," Duffield looked at her the way a man looks at a clock that has struck an hour early. "A person of means," he said. "Someone who could stand behind the debt if Mrs. Coombe cannot pay it herself." "Then let it be me," Eliza said. The room went very quiet. The widow turned in her chair and looked at her as if she had not truly seen her before that moment, though they had passed each other in the market 100 times. The man in the brown coat lowered his paper, slowly, and looked at Eliza Marsh for the first time. "You have not £42, Miss Marsh, miss," Duffield said, not unkindly. "No," she said. "I have £4 saved, and I have my wages from you, sir, which you may hold back against it, a portion each week, for as long as it takes. And I have a room I could give up for a smaller one and send the difference. It will not be fast, but it will be paid, every shilling, and Mrs. Coombe need not go to any prison to see it done." "You do not know this family, miss," Duffield said. "You owe them nothing." "I know the boy is sick," Eliza said, "and I know what a prison does to an old woman, and what it does to a child left with no one. That is enough owing for me." She did not say it to be admired. She would in fact have been mortified to know that anyone thought her noble for it. She said it because it seemed, in that cold room, the only sane thing to say, and because she believed, as she believed most days, that no one of any consequence was watching her say it. She was wrong about that, but she did not know it yet, and would not know it for a long while, and it was only much later, warm by a different fire, in a house she had not then imagined she would ever enter, that she learned the man in the plain brown coat had come to that office that morning for exactly one reason. He had come to see, unannounced and unknown, what an ordinary woman with nothing to gain would do when she believed that no one of any rank could see her do it. He held the note himself. He had held it for a fortnight, bought quietly out of a failed merchant's papers, and he had told no one, not even Duffield, who he was. Widow Coombe did not thank her the way people thank one another in books. She took Eliza's hand in both of hers, which were cold and rough as bark, and she said nothing at all for a long moment, and then she said only, "Why? Which was?" Eliza thought later, the truest question anyone asked her that whole winter. "I would have done it for anyone," Eliza said, and drew her hand back, gently, because she did not like to be held on to, and because gratitude embarrassed her more than debt did. "Please, do not thank me. It is only paper and time." Mr. Duffield drew up the surety that same hour, and Eliza signed it with her father's pen, and the ink stained her finger darker than it had been in a year, and she did not look again at the man in the brown coat, who had gone very still in his corner, and was watching her hand on the page as though it were the only true thing he had seen in a long time. She walked home in the frost, with £4 less certain future than she had had that morning, and she felt, oddly, lighter than she had in a month. She did not know that the man in the brown coat followed her progress with his eyes until she turned the corner by the drapers, and that he then asked Mr. Duffield, in a voice gone carefully idle, who Miss Marsh was, and how long she had worked for him, and whether she had family. She did not know that he wrote, that same evening, a short letter under an assumed hand instructing that a doctor be sent to the widow Coomb's grandson at no charge and with no name attached to the kindness. She did not know any of it. She went home and mended a torn hem for the chandler's wife, and ate her bread and butter, and slept, and did not dream of dukes, because she had never in her life had reason to. Widow Coombe wept when the doctor came. 2 mornings later, a clean-shaven young man with a good black bag, who said only that his fee had been settled by a gentleman who wished not to be named, and that he would call again on Thursday. She wept harder when, on Thursday, the doctor pronounced the fever broken, and the boy like to mend. She did not weep in front of Eliza, because Eliza, coming by with a jar of broth and a clean shirt turned from one of her father's old ones, would not have known what to do with tears, and the widow seemed to sense it. "Someone is paying for this," the widow said, low, as though it were a secret worth keeping close. "Not you, someone else." "The doctor will not say who." "Then let him keep his secret," Eliza said. "It is his to keep." She did not know she was describing, in that small sentence, the exact temper of the man who had arranged it. She went back to her copying that afternoon, 3 streets over, and did not think of the man in the brown coat again, or thought she did not, though she found herself, twice that week, remembering the particular stillness of him, the way he had lowered his paper as though it cost him something to do it. Mr. Duffield's office, in the weeks that followed, saw a good deal more of a certain Mr. Adair, who gave out that he was an agent for the estate that held several notes about the district, and had come to look into them personally, a habit the town found eccentric, and Mr. Duffield found faintly alarming, since agents did not, as a rule, trouble themselves to know a debtor's grandson's Christian name. Mr. Adair had a low, even voice and a way of listening that made a person feel they had said more than they meant to. He was not handsome in the way the confectioner's assistant thought handsome meant. His nose had been broken once, and had healed a little crooked. His eyes were a deep, dark brown, the colour of strong tea held up to a window, and they missed very little. He came to Duffield's office on the pretext of estate business 3 times in as many weeks, and each time Eliza was there at her copying, bent over her ledger, with her ruined 3rd finger black to the knuckle. And each time he found some small reason to remain in the room a 1/4 hour longer than his business required. "You have a quick hand, Miss Marsh," he said, the 2nd time, watching her total a column without moving her lips. "My father taught me," she said, not looking up. "He said a woman who could add was worth 2, who could only smile." "Was he right?" "He was my father," she said. "I am hardly a fair judge." Mr. Adair almost smiled. It did not fully arrive, but something in his face moved toward it, and then thought better of it, and Eliza noticed, and filed the noticing away without knowing why she kept it. "You signed a heavy thing for the widow Coombe," he said, on the 3rd visit, when Duffield had stepped out. £42 is not paper and time to a woman who lives above a chandler's. "You heard that," she said. "It was not quite a question. I was in the room. I remember." She set down her pen. "It is not so heavy. I have no one depending on me. If I go without a fire 2 nights a week and take in a little more mending, it comes right in the end. Mrs. Coombe has a boy depending on her. That is heavier. Some would call it foolish to stand behind a stranger's debt. Some would, she agreed. I have been called worse for less. I would rather be a fool with a clear conscience than wise with a hard one. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of long moments the clock on Duffield's mantel seemed to lean into, ticking slower, and then he said, quite low, I think you would rather be neither. I think you would rather simply be left to do as you think right, and have no one remark on it at all. Yes, Eliza said, surprised into honesty. That is exactly it. He did not smile that time either, but something in his shoulders eased, as though she had passed a test she did not know she had been sitting. She learned, in pieces over those weeks, that Mr. Adair was a hard man to place. He spoke like a gentleman, and dressed like a prosperous clerk. He knew figures the way she did, and land the way a steward did, and once, when Delphine mentioned a family 2 farms over ruined by a hard winter, Mr. Adair's face closed like a door. And he said only that the previous management of certain estates in this country had done a great deal of harm in the name of what was owed, and that he did not intend to continue in that vein. And then he changed the subject so firmly that Duffield did not raise it again. What she did not know, because he did not tell her, and would not for a long while, was that his own father had been exactly such a landlord, hard behind a smiling face, and had let a steward drive 3 tenant families into debtors' cells rather than forgive so much as a season's rent, and that the young Duke, when the title came to him 2 years past, had gone through his father's papers alone in a cold study, and found the accounting of it, family by family, written up as neatly as a grocer's ledger, and had been sick to his stomach over it, and had resolved, in a silence he told no one, that he would never again sign away a person's liberty on the strength of a steward's report. He would see for himself. He would go, unknown, and watch what people did when they believed his rank could not see them, because that, he had come to believe, was the only test in the world that told the truth. He had been engaged once, before the title came to him, to a woman of good family and prettier manners than his own, who had wept beautifully at the smallest provocation, and had, within his own hearing, once told a housemaid who broke a dish that she would see her turned off without a character. He had broken the engagement within the month, quietly, at some cost to his standing, and had told himself since that he would rather live and die unmarried than bind himself to someone who was kind only where it could be seen. He did not tell Eliza any of this. He only watched her total her columns, and stain her finger with ink, and refuse twice small kindnesses he offered her under Mr. Adair's plain name, a chair nearer the fire, a lift in a cart on a wet day, because she said each time that she did very well as she was, and did not like to put anyone out. Spring was still a long way off when Lady Cordelia Vernon came to Colworth to see her cousin's estate business managed, and the town felt the temperature drop several degrees before her carriage had even stopped moving. She was the Duke of Harrow's cousin on his mother's side, a handsome woman near 30, with a laugh like a small bell. Always exactly 3 notes, rung to be heard rather than felt. She had expected for some years now that when Julian finally married it would be to consolidate something, land or fortune, or at the very least a name that meant something in London. And she had not liked the rumours that had reached her, thin as smoke but persistent, that her cousin had been spending a great deal of time in a market town, seeing to a solicitor's business he could easily have delegated. She found her way, on a cold clear afternoon, to Widdocombe's cottage, ostensibly to inspect a charity case on the estate's books, and found Eliza there, on her knees by the hearth with a needle in her hand, hemming a shirt for the boy Tom, who sat wrapped in a blanket, looking better than he had in a month. "You are the seamstress," Lady Cordelia said, taking in the room, the darned gloves on the chair, Eliza's ink-black finger, in one long assessing look. "The one who signed the note." "I am, my lady." Eliza did not rise from her knees. It was not defiance. She simply had a hem to finish. How very charitable of you. And how very strange. A woman with nothing standing surety for a woman with less. One wonders what you hoped to gain by it. "I hoped to gain nothing, my lady. I hoped Mrs. Combe would not go to prison." "Look at your hands," Lady Cordelia said, and there was something almost pleasant in the cruelty of it, the way she said it as though remarking on the weather. "Red to the knuckle, ink under the nails. Is that the hand you mean to offer people when you go about rescuing widows? No wonder you are not married. What man wants a wife with a clerk's hands and a beggar's purse?" Eliza set down her needle. She did not answer at once. Tom, from his blanket, watched with the frank interest of a child who understands more than adults' credit. "My hands are what fed me since my father died," Eliza said at last, plainly, without heat. "I am not ashamed of them. Fair is not the same as kind, my lady. There is a difference. I would rather have red knuckles and a clear conscience than white ones and none." Lady Cordelia's laugh came again. 3 notes, but thinner this time, as though it had cost her something to produce it. "How very noble you all sound, you people who have nothing. It is easy to be virtuous when virtue is all you can afford." She left without another word to the widow, her skirts sweeping the swept floor as though it might soil her. She did not know that the Duke of Harrow, standing in the cottage doorway in his plain brown coat, had heard the whole exchange, and that his face, for the length of it, had gone the particular white of a man holding his temper by main force. He said nothing to his cousin. He crossed the room instead and crouched by Tom's chair, and asked him, gravely, as though it were the most important question in the world, whether the broth agreed with him. And the boy said it did, very much, and grinned a gap-toothed grin, and something in the Duke's shoulders came down 1/2 an inch. "You did not have to answer her," he said to Eliza, low, once Lady Cordelia's carriage could be heard rattling off down the lane. "No," Eliza agreed. "But I did not want her to think she had struck home when she had not." Had she not? Eliza considered the question honestly, because that was the only way she knew how to consider a question. A little, she admitted. One does not enjoy being told one's hands are ugly. But it passes. It is only words, and words cost her nothing, and me nothing either, if I do not let them. He looked at her the way a man looks at a ledger that has, against all expectation, balanced. The debt did not pay itself off as neatly as words. February came in hard, and Eliza gave up her fire 2 nights a week as she had said she would, and took a smaller room when the chandler raised the rent, and sold in the coldest week a small gold ring that had been her mother's, the one thing of value she had left besides the pen, because the surety's first quarter had come due, and she was 3 shillings short. She did not tell anyone. She told herself it was only a ring, and that her mother, wherever she was, would rather see a boy's fever broken than a ring kept. It was in that same week that word reached her, second-hand through the draper's wife, that Mr. Adair had been seen at Harrow Hall itself, and not as a caller at the servants' door, and that the housekeeper there, a Mrs. Pruitt, had called him, quite naturally, Your Grace. Eliza did not sleep well that night. She told herself it was the cold. She did not go to the solicitor's office for 4 days after that, sending word that she was needed elsewhere, though in truth she needed only to sit with the fact of it. turning it over the way she turned over a hem to check her stitches. She had spoken to a duke as though he were a clerk. She had told him her hands fed her, and been unashamed of it in front of him, not knowing. She had, worse, let herself notice the way his face eased when he was near her, and had let herself begin, in the quiet unguarded hour before sleep, to hope for something she had no business hoping for. Lady Cordelia did not let the matter rest. Within the week it was known about Colworth, from a source no one could quite name, that the seamstress who had taken up the widow Coomb's debt was scheming after the Duke's notice, angling with her borrowed sympathy to catch a great man's eye, and Mr. Duffield, cornered by a client who repeated the talk to his face with evident relish, came home to Eliza white about the mouth and told her, gently as he could, that perhaps it would be better, for a time, if she took her copying work elsewhere. She did not argue with him. She had learned over 6 hard years that arguing with a closing door rarely opened it again. She thanked him for his past kindness, gathered her few things, and walked home through a rain that had begun to turn the last of the frost to grey slush, and she did not cry where anyone could see her, because she had trained herself long ago not to cry where it showed. She sat that evening in her small cold room with her father's pen in her hand, and did not write anything with it. She thought of the widow, whose debt was not yet half paid. She thought of Lady Cordelia's bell laugh. She thought, longest of all, of Mr. Adair, who was not Mr. Adair, who had let her believe a false name for weeks while she said things to him she would never have said to a duke, if she had known, and the thought sat in her chest like a stone. She decided that night, by the light of one candle she could not afford to burn so long, that whatever had been growing between them, whatever small foolish warmth, must be put out now, before it grew into something that could be used against her, or against him, or against the widow's fragile peace. She would not go to Harrow Hall. She would not seek him out to demand an accounting. She would simply step back, quietly, the way she had learned to step back from everything in her life that threatened to cost more than she had to give. She did not know, sitting there with her candle guttering low, that 2 streets away Mrs. Pruitt, the Duke's housekeeper, had already resolved to call on her the very next morning, because Mrs. Pruitt had watched her employer come home from Colworth these 6 weeks looking, for the first time since his father's funeral, like a man with something to live for, and Mrs. Pruitt was not about to let a viper like Lady Cordelia Vernon put that fire out with 3 notes of a false laugh. Mrs. Pruitt arrived the next morning with a basket she did not need to bring, and a manner that suggested she had come only to pass the time. "You'll take tea," she said, in the tone of a woman who did not consider it a question, and set the kettle on before Eliza had finished protesting that she had none to offer in return. "I'm not stopping for your tea, girl. I've brought my own leaves. Sit down. You look like you haven't slept." "I have had a great deal to think of," Eliza admitted. "I dare say." Mrs. Pruitt settled into the room's one good chair with the ease of a woman twice her employer's age, and a good deal more his equal in temper. "You've heard, then, about the name?" "I have heard he is a duke," Eliza said. "I have not heard why he let me believe otherwise for 2 months. That is his tale to tell, not mine, and he will tell it, if you give him half a chance, though God knows the man would rather face a magistrate than his own feelings." Mrs. Pruitt poured out 2 cups without asking. "But I will tell you what is mine to tell, since you are too proud to ask, and too honest to pretend you don't wonder. Do you know who paid for the doctor that came to young Tom Coombe?" I had guessed. Do you know who has quietly settled the note on the Hargreaves' cottage? The one that would have put a family of 6 out on the road last Michaelmas? Or who sent new boots to every child at the charity school last winter, with no name on the box, and told the schoolmistress to say, if anyone asked, that they'd come from an anonymous well-wisher and she wasn't to press the matter? Mrs. Pruitt's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. I have kept that man's house 11 years, Miss Marsh. I have never once heard him take credit for a kindness in all that time. He asked me, when he came into the title, why his father's tenants flinched when the family carriage came up the lane, and when I told him, plain as I'm telling you, he did not sleep for a week. He has spent every day since trying to be the opposite of what his father was, and he does it in the dark, on purpose, because he does not trust a kindness that wants an audience. He does not trust it in himself least of all. Eliza sat very still, her cup untouched, the ink stain on her finger dark against the white china. Why does he hide it? She said, finally, even from those he helps. Because his father never hid a debt collected in his life, and made very sure the whole county watched him collect it, Mrs. Pruitt said. And because a woman he was once fool enough to promise himself to was kind exactly as far as being watched required, and not 1 inch further, and he has spent every day since deciding never again to trust a kindness he could not verify unwatched. She set down her cup. You signed for a stranger's debt in a cold room, believing no one who mattered was looking. That is the only reason he has not been able to stop thinking of you since, girl, whatever his cousin says about your hands. She left the basket behind when she went, though she had said she would not, and Eliza sat a long while after the door closed, turning the whole of it over, and found that the stone in her chest had not lifted. Not quite, because knowing a man's goodness did not undo the sting of having been, however gently, deceived. The summons came 3 days later, not from Mr. Adair, but from the Duke of Harrow, in his own hand, asking whether Miss Marsh would do him the honour of calling at Harrow Hall on a matter concerning the note of Widow Coombe, which he understood, as the holder of it, required her signature to close. She went. She told herself she went for the widow's sake, and for no other reason, and she almost believed it. Harrow Hall's study was a small room for so great a house, low-ceilinged, warm with a fire built up higher than economy strictly allowed, and it smelled of leather and wood smoke, and faintly of the ink he kept on his own desk. He rose when she entered. He did not offer his hand. He had learned in 2 months of watching her that she did not like to be reached for. "Miss Marsh," he said, "thank you for coming." "Your Grace," she said, and the word sat strangely in her mouth, a wall put up where there had not been one before. He winced faintly at that. "I would rather you called me nothing at all than that, if it is all the same to you." "It is not all the same to me," she said, with the plainness that had first made him look at her twice. "I do not know what to call a man who let me believe he was an agent for 2 months while I told him things I would not have told a duke." "No," he agreed. "You would not have told a duke that his hands looked cold, and offered him the end of your own scarf. You would not have told a duke that his estate's tenants seemed to flinch at the sight of the family carriage, and that you thought it a shame, because you had heard he was trying to be better than that. You told those things to a man you believed had no power over you at all. That is precisely why I never once corrected you." He came around the desk, not close, and stood where the firelight caught the crooked line of his broken nose, the strong dark brown of his eyes. "I have told you already, in a manner of speaking, why I do it. I will tell you now in my own words, because you are owed the whole of it, not pieces from my housekeeper." She said nothing. She had learned from him the value of a held silence. "My father was a hard man behind a soft face," he said. "He ruined families and called it good management, and he taught every steward under him to do the same. And when I came into the title, I found the accounting of it in his own hand, family by family, like a grocer's book. I could not undo it. I could only decide not to repeat it. And I found, very quickly, that I could not trust a report brought to me by a steward who knew he was being watched. And I could not trust a smile offered to a duke who knew he held the deciding of a debt. I wanted to see what people did when they believed no rank of mine could see them. That is the only test I have ever found that tells the truth. And I passed it," Eliza said. "Not quite a question, not quite bitter." "You did more than pass it," he said. "You signed away 4 years of your own liberty for a woman you had spoken to perhaps twice, and when I asked you why. You said you would have done it for anyone, and you meant it, and you were embarrassed that I asked. I have watched a great many people be kind when they thought a duke was watching, Miss Marsh. I had never, in 35 years, watched anyone be kind when they were certain he was not." 32, she said. "You are not 35. Something in his face moved, unpractised, toward a smile, and this time it arrived. 32, he agreed. "You correct figures even when the figure is my age." "Old habits," she said, and did not smile back, though it cost her something not to. "I do not ask you to forgive the deceiving of it tonight," he said. "I have wronged you a little, in letting it run so long, and I know it. I ask only that you let me say the rest, and then I will trouble you no further unless you wish it. Whatever surety remains on the widow's note is discharged, in full as of this hour, and it was discharged the day you signed it, though I let the paper stand, because I thought you would refuse the truth of it if I offered outright. I do not offer it now as payment for anything. I offer it because it was always, in truth, my own debt to forgive, and I was ashamed to have let a woman with £4 to her name carry it a day longer than she had to." Eliza's hands, in her lap, were very still. She was proud, later, of how still they were. "That is generous," she said. "It is also, forgive me, exactly the kind of thing that makes a woman feel she has been managed rather than met plainly. I would rather you had told me who you were the first week, and let me decide for myself what to say to a duke, than have you decide for me what I was safe to say to a stranger. You are right," he said, without argument. "I have thought the same thing more than once these past weeks, and told myself each time that I would say it tomorrow, and did not. That was cowardice dressed as caution, and I am sorry for it." She rose. She had not meant to rise so soon, but the room had grown very warm, and the stone in her chest had not lifted, and she needed a moment where he could not read her face by firelight. "I would like to go home," she said, "not because of anything you have said tonight, because I need to think, and I cannot think clearly in a room that smells of your ink." He did not reach for her. He did not ask her to stay, or to answer him now, or even to say when she might answer him at all. "I will not send for you again," he said, "until you send for me first. I would rather have your no, freely given whenever it comes, than a yes you gave me tonight, because the fire was warm, and I looked sorry enough to be forgiven." She looked at him a long moment. It was, she thought, the first entirely honest thing anyone of rank had ever said to her. "That is fair," she said. "Fair is not always kind. But it is fair." She walked home in the dark with no lamp, because she knew the road, and the cold got into her knuckles the whole way, and she did not think once about turning back. Spring came late that year, but it came thoroughly, the way it does after a hard winter. All at once the hedgerows greening in a week, and the river running loud with melt. Eliza took up copying work again, for a solicitor 2 towns over, who had not heard the Colworth talk, and she mended linen in her evenings, and she visited the widow Coombe twice a week to see Tom, who had grown a full inch and lost the grey look he had carried since Christmas, and who had begun. To his grandmother's despair and Eliza's quiet delight, to follow her about asking why the sky was blue and why ink was black, and why some people had a great deal of money and did nothing useful with it at all. It was Tom, in the end, who told her the last of it, in the artless way of a child repeating what he has overheard and not understood the weight of. Grandmother says the fine lady came again. He informed Eliza one afternoon, swinging his legs from the widow's one good chair, the one with the bell laugh. She said something cruel to Betsy in the kitchen and made her cry, and the housekeeper up at the big house heard of it and told the Duke, and the Duke sent the fine lady away to her aunt's in Scarborough, and said she wasn't to come back till she'd learned how to speak to people who couldn't answer her back. "Is that so?" Eliza said, carefully, threading her needle. "That's what grandmother heard from the baker's wife," Tom said, with the total confidence of an 8-year-old citing sources. And grandmother heard something else too. She heard the doctor that fixed my chest, and the boots at the school, and the money that came for the Hargreaves' cottage, all came from the same person. And it was him, and he never once let anybody say his name on it. Grandmother cried when she heard that. I don't know why, it wasn't a sad thing. No, Eliza agreed, and found her own eyes had gone unexpectedly warm. It was not a sad thing at all. She sat a long while that evening with her father's pen in her hand, and this time she did write a short letter in her good clear hand, and she did not sign it "Your Grace's obedient servant," or anything so formal, because she had decided, somewhere in the walking home from the widow's, exactly what she wanted to say, and exactly how plainly she wanted to say it. He came the next afternoon, on foot, without the carriage, as though he had walked the whole way from Harrow Hall, too impatient to wait for horses to be put to. She met him at her own door, in her own poor room that smelled of tallow, and she did not curtsy, and she did not call him Your Grace. "You did not tell me about Scarborough," she said. "It was not a kindness I meant to be known," he said. "Mrs. Pruitt has a loose tongue where it suits her." "She has a very useful loose tongue," Eliza said. "I have had a fortnight to think, since you last stood in a warm room and told me the whole of yourself. I find I have thought of very little else. And what have you decided?" "That I do not want a man who rescues," she said. "I have never wanted rescuing, and I would refuse it again tomorrow, if it were offered as rescue. But I have decided that I would like very much a man who tells me the truth, plainly, the first time, and lets me decide for myself what to do with it. I would like to be spoken to, not managed. I would like never to be lied to again, not even kindly, not even to spare my feelings. Can you give me that?" "I can try," he said. "I will fail at it sometimes. I am better at silence than at speech, you have seen that yourself. But I would rather fail honestly in front of you than succeed at managing you the way I manage the truth of my name." "Then yes," she said. "It is the only word I need." He drew off one glove, finger by finger, slowly, as though it were the last piece of formality he meant to keep between them, and took her bare hand in his, ink stain and red knuckles and all, and did not kiss it so much as hold it. turning it over once, gently, to look at the mark her father's pen had left, worn in so deep it would likely never fully wash away. "I have loved a great many things quietly in my life," he said. "I find I am tired of loving quietly. May I say it plainly, once, so there is no mistaking it? I love you, not for the debt you signed, and not for what it proved to me, though it did prove it. I love you for the way you speak the truth even when it costs you, and for the way you are ashamed of thanks, and for the way you told my own cousin that fair is not the same as kind, standing on your knees on another woman's hearth with a needle in your hand as though you had every right in the world to say it. You did. You have that right with me too. Then say it again sometime," Eliza said, unsteadily, for the first time that whole long winter, when I am not wearing my second-best dress and smelling of tallow. He almost laughed. It arrived, this time, all the way, and she found she liked it a great deal better than the almost. They were married in June, quietly, in the Colworth church, with its cold stone floor gone warm at last with early summer light, and the wedding was small, only because the Duke insisted the whole county would make more fuss of it than either of them wanted, though he could not, in the end, prevent Mrs. Pruitt from filling the church with every flower in the Hall's gardens, nor prevent Widow Coombe and Tom, scrubbed and solemn in the second pew, from crying openly through the whole of it, which was, everyone agreed after, exactly the right amount of crying for such an occasion. A year later, almost to the week, the frost came down early again, and it lay on the drive at Harrow Hall the colour of iron, and inside, by a fire built up a little higher than economy required, the Duke of Harrow sat with his wife's bare hand laced through her fingers still faintly marked with ink, because she had never given up her father's pen, and had, in fact, taken to keeping the estate's charity accounts herself, in a hand so clear the housekeeper said it was a pleasure to read a ledger for once. Widow Coombe had a cottage of her own now, with a good roof and no debt on it at all, and Tom was at the charity school learning his letters from a schoolmistress, who still would not say, if asked, where the boots came from. Lady Cordelia Vernon wrote once a season from Scarborough, brief and correct, and was received at Christmas only, and briefly, and everyone found that arrangements suited them very well. A robin called once, outside the window, in the particular way robins call in the last cold hour before a thaw, and the Duke, without looking up from the fire, said that he had never in his life expected to be glad of the sound of a robin, and his wife said that was, on the whole, exactly what she had thought about him too. Character, in the end, is only what a person does when they believe no one of consequence is watching, and the rarest thing in any great house is not a title, but a hand that stays open when it thinks it is alone.